Several years ago, I was asked to give a version of this talk at a big financial services conference where people could go to see different speakers at the same time. So a woman came up at the end of my presentation and she said, "I'm so glad that I saw your talk. I really enjoyed it and you were great. And I have to be honest, I almost skipped your presentation because I just really figured that I would hate you." And I said, "Well, thank you for that unusual compliment. And may I ask why you assumed you would hate me?" And she said, "Well, I just figured anyone who talks about happiness would be all about like kittens and rainbows and just really irritating. And by the end of the hour, I would want to strangle you. And I don't, so thank you so very much." And I start the talk with that story to illustrate something really important that I'm going to be returning to again and again today. There are people in the world and people in this room who are the kittens and rainbow people, who can magically find that silver lining. And if you're one of those people, congratulations. And this next hour is going to be very affirming of all the things that you're already doing very well in your own lives. But then there are other people, and I'm one of the other people, that I don't naturally find myself happy, that I actually have to work for my happiness. And so I'm going to be talking today about myths we have about happiness, what actually does predict happiness. But the final moments of my talk, I'm going to give us specific strategies that we all can use to increase happiness no matter where you fall on that natural happiness continuum. And none of these are things like sell all your belongings and move to Aruba. They're all things you can do. But I want to start by talking about why we care about happiness. And let me say that I know some people are watching this on TV and some people are in the back and on the sides. There's nothing super important on the pages, on the PowerPoint. And anybody who wants a copy of this entire deck, just shoot me an email at the end of the talk and I'll send it to you for free. So you can all have it, for reference later on. So I want to start by talking about why we care about happiness. And basically, we all should care about our own happiness and the happiness of people around us, because research shows that happy people are different from people who are not happy in really important ways. So research shows, for example, that happy people are more helpful and less hostile. They go through life in sort of a kinder, gentler way all the time. A really simple illustration of this was done a few years ago. Researchers went up to random strangers in a mall and they asked them for very low-level favors. Could I have change for $1? Would you mail this letter? Could I borrow your phone? Very low-level favors. But what they varied was where you got asked the favor. Half of the people got asked in front of a good-smelling store, like Cinnabon or Mrs. Fields cookies. And half of the people got asked for the favor in front of a neutral-smelling store, like Banana Republic or The Gap. Guess who got help faster? Cinnabon. So now you've already learned some information you can use if you ever need help in a mall someday, right? Happy people are also less hostile, and even little moments can increase our feelings of happiness and reduce hostility. This point was brought home to me a few years ago. I was driving with my kids to the local McDonald's. I waited at a red light for the light to turn green. Light turned green, and I proceeded to make a legal turn to go into the drive-through line, when all of a sudden, a car in the opposite direction ran their red light and careened towards me at a very high rate of speed. So I swerved to one side, and they swerved to the other side, and we didn't collide, but it was very narrowly a really serious collision. So I catch my breath, I turn into the drive-through line, and guess who's now in front of me in the line? That car. They place their order, they then go to the window, and they proceed to have like a 20-minute conversation with the cashier, like it's their long-lost cousin or something. And I'm getting more and more irritated. You nearly killed me. Now this is a 20-minute drive-through experience. Finally, they pull away. And as they pull away, they stick their hand out the window. And they do a little wave like this towards my car. So I rolled down my window. And I made a different gesture. I drive to the window, I have my credit card in, and the cashier says, "Oh no, that card just paid for your food." So then I felt like that, because they'd already driven away, and my kids had seen the gesture. And clearly they were like, "Well, we nearly killed you, but your Egg McMuffin is free, so we're equal, right?" But in that moment, of course, my anger faded, my hostility faded, and even little tiny moments can increase our happiness. Lots of the Silicon Valley companies have already realized something really important. Happy people are better at work, people who like their jobs. This is a picture of Google headquarters. It's a circular slide. The Silicon Valley companies have gone out of the way to make the workplace fun. There's ping pong tables, there's free food, there's all sorts of perks. One company profiled on the front page of the New York Times is doing something new. They're sending a cleaning service to every employee's house once a week. Would that make you happy? Could you ever leave that job, right? And so they're not just doing it to make people happy. They're doing it because people who have a job that comes with a cleaning service, they're going to be very loyal. They're going to work very hard to keep that job. They're going to tell all their friends. But most importantly, for all of us, happy people experience better health. In a study that my college students find particularly disgusting, researchers recruited people, they measured their happiness, and then, with the people's permission, they inserted a cold virus up their nostril. Then they followed them for 4 weeks, and every day they tested, what are your symptoms? Are you sneezing, coughing, runny nose? Every day they collected saliva samples and tested for antibodies to the cold in their body. Every night they gathered the people's used tissues and weighed them to measure mucus production. Across every single dimension, happy people were less likely to manifest signs of the cold, even when it had been directly inserted into their bodies. Another study, they measured people's happiness the night before a routine scheduled surgery. And then they looked at how quickly did they get out of bed? How much pain medication did they need? What were the nurses' reports? How quickly did they get discharged from the hospital? Across every single dimension, happy people recovered faster from surgery. Third, and most important finding, happy people live longer. This next study used a really remarkable sample, professional baseball players. What they did in this study was they got these baseball cards, the baseball players' rookie baseball cards, and they looked at the facial expression in these cards, and then they looked at how old the men were when they died. And here's the data. Men who had a flat expression lived to about 73. Men who had a slight smile, a little smile, lived to about 75. Men who had a big beaming smile on their rookie baseball cards lived on average to be just about 80. So that's a 7-year gap as a function of facial expression on these rookie baseball cards. So happy people experience all kinds of benefits. They're nicer, they're less hostile, they're more productive at work, they're healthier, they live longer. So it makes sense that we'd all want to do these things to experience these benefits. But here's the challenge. Many people, probably most people, look for happiness in the wrong places. And there are lots of myths in our society about what brings us happiness, and they really are just myths. So guess what the number one mistake is that people make in thinking something will bring them happiness, but it really doesn't? Guess what that mistake is? Money. Good. It's always a little risky because sometimes a person will call out marriage, and it's like so awkward if they're with their spouse. Anyway, so good. Answer is money. Overwhelmingly, people think, if I just lived in a nicer, prettier house, surely I would be happier. This is a picture of Tiger Woods' house, maybe now Tiger Woods' ex-wife's house. And people think, just a little bit more money, surely I would be happier. But the reality is, we adapt very quickly to newfound wealth. Initially, it makes us happier, and then we adapt. Many people in this room are old enough to remember their excitement about getting your very first cell phone. Maybe some of you see it in one of those pictures. Your very first cell phone could do what? What could it do? Make a call, maybe, right? Depending on where you were, right? But it was exciting, because maybe you could make a call from your car. But if you had that phone right now, you might feel very sad, because you expect that your phone will also let you shoot a movie, buy a dress, read a book, etc. And that's the power of adaptation. Now, I do want to say something really important. For people who are living below the poverty line, for people who are worried, are my kids going to have enough to eat tomorrow? Do we have a safe place to sleep tonight? Are we going to have heat this winter? For people who are worried about survival, more money absolutely does lead to more happiness. But for people who are not worried about survival, we adapt very, very quickly to newfound wealth, and it doesn't increase our happiness. And some people have known this for a long time. As Benjamin Franklin said, money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. That's the challenge. So what else do we think will make us happy, but we're wrong? Climate. Overwhelmingly, people think if I just lived in a warmer, prettier climate, surely I would be happier. Large-scale surveys of Americans have asked people, would you feel happier if you lived in California or North Dakota? Guess what pretty much everybody says? California. Very consistent finding. And this belief actually forms the basis for a joke I tell students. So here's the joke. Patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I have terrible news. You have 6 months to live. And the patient says, well, that is terrible news. What do you suggest I do? And the doctor says, you should immediately move to North Dakota. And the patient says, absolutely, I'll do that right away. And if I move to North Dakota, will I live longer? And the doctor says, no, but it will feel like forever. No. People from North Dakota super don't like that joke. But that joke is wrong. Gallup poll a few years ago, North Dakota is one of the top 5 happiest states. California is not. So again, we're wrong. That joke illustrates something that we think to be true, but we're actually not accurate. Another example, life events. Overwhelmingly, people think when just this life event happens, then I will be happy. And that life event changes depending on your age. When I get into college, when I graduate from college, when I get a job, when I get a promotion, when I buy a house, when I retire, whatever it is. There's always something that when this thing happens, then that's when I get happy. But the reality is we adapt to those events just like money. So take the example of promotion. So you want a promotion, you work harder and harder to get that promotion, you get it, all of a sudden it turns out you have to do what? Yeah, that job, as it turns out. Yeah, and that job has pressure and deadlines and colleagues, and the permanent happiness you thought was yours, it's not there. You adapt just like you do to more money. But there's one kind of life event that's a little bit interesting in terms of the research, because this life event does consistently predict happiness for some people, and that's the life event of marriage. So what the research on science of happiness and marriage shows us is that marriage does consistently make some people happy, and those people are called, yeah, men. Yeah, that's exactly right. I can always wait and a woman will say it. Yeah, the answer is men. Married men are happier than single men. They're healthier than single men. They live longer than single men. They're less likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders. Overwhelmingly, married men benefit in all sorts of ways. And here's what's even better. For the men, it doesn't matter who they're married to. Anyone is good. Anyone is good. Now, here's the challenge for women. Happily married women are happier and healthier than single women. But unhappily married women are less happy and less healthy than single women. So for men, it's all good. But for women, you got to be picky, because good marriage is good, but bad marriage is really bad. And what I like about that finding is that by all accounts, this suggests that this setup, William and Kate, it's going to be better for William than it is for Kate. Kate, we hope she's happy. But William's mom, married to a prince, not so happy. Quality matters for women. One more life event that overwhelmingly we think will make us happy: having children. This is a little bit of an outdated picture of my 3 kids. Yeah, and in the picture they look really quiet, clean, well-behaved. And that sort of is the challenge, is that in the abstract, having children seems like a really good thing to do. But the reality, day in and day out of parenthood, is what? It's really hard. It's really hard. I gave this talk once in a giant hotel ballroom, like 800 people, and I said, the reality, day in and day out. And a woman right in the front row says, hell. And it literally echoed through the ballroom, like, hell, hell, hell. Now, she had a 2-year-old at home. But the reality, day in and day out of parenting, is it's really hard. It's playing lots of boring games like Candyland that have absolutely no strategy. It's doing huge amounts of laundry. It's literally touching somebody else's poop. And as writer Annie Lamott says, having a baby is like suddenly getting the world's worst roommate. So here's what the data on happiness in parenthood tells us. Parents do have more joy than non-parents. There's the joy of the homemade Mother's Day card, or your kid hitting a home run in Little League, or these sort of wonderfully special, tender moments. And those peaks are bigger peaks than non-parents experience. But those highs are absolutely coupled with lows of worry and stress and heartache. And so parents have more highs and parents have more lows, and non-parents have a much more even keel existence. Now, sometimes I'll give one of these talks and a person will come up afterwards and say, but Catherine, you have to remember, if you have children, you might get grandchildren, and grandchildren makes me very happy. And what I say to that is, gosh, I hope so. Yeah. Really hope so. All right. So I've talked about why we care about happiness, and I've talked about what doesn't make us happy. I now want to turn to the good news. And the good news is there are lots of things that do make us happy. So there are many simple behaviors we can engage in our daily lives that are associated with well-being. One of these, this won't be the most surprising thing I say, is eating. Eating makes us happy. But it's not just the act of chewing and swallowing, it's eating particular kinds of foods. What kinds of foods make us happy? Chocolate, sweets, sugars, etc. Fats. There's no evidence for happiness in celery, for example. Now, the good news is this data is absolutely coupled with other very strong data about the link between exercise and happiness. Who here has already heard about the link between exercise, endorphins, and happiness? Raise your hands. Great, great, wonderful. So most of you already know about that. When you're exercising, a chemical, endorphins, is elevated in your body. That actually does make you feel better. Plus, one of the best feelings we can have is the feeling of having exercised, right? And unfortunately, you can only get the having exercise feeling by exercising first. It's too bad. Now, we know that shopping makes us happy, but again, it's more interesting than you might think. Who here has ever had a wonderful feeling of happiness because you found the perfect gift for someone you care about? That feeling of happiness is higher than when you buy for yourself. So it's not about shopping, acquiring things. It's really about shopping. Relationship building is where you get the biggest perk in terms of happiness. The next one, given where I'm giving this talk, I hope you all know this one already. Nature. Spending time in nature makes people feel happier. It also, and this is good news for you all, makes you healthier. In a remarkably simple study, researchers at a Pennsylvania hospital compared rates of recovery for patients who'd had the exact same surgery, but they'd been assigned to one of 2 different wings in the hospital. The way this hospital is set up, one wing overlooked a parking lot. So people assigned to this wing saw cars and traffic and asphalt. The other wing of the hospital overlooked a lovely park. So people assigned to this wing saw trees and flowers and grass. So they compared rates of recovery for patients who'd been assigned to one of these 2 wings. And what they found was that patients overlooking the park got out of bed faster, needed less pain medication, and got discharged faster from the hospital. In a very recent study that tries to examine, well, what is it that just looking at nature outside your hospital window could do to speed up recovery, researchers brought in people and put them in an MRI machine to measure brain activation, and then what they tallied was how people's brains responded to different kinds of pictures. And I'm going to show you now two pictures that were actually used in this study. So one of the pictures was of a very pretty urban city skyline. So you saw sky and clouds and tall buildings. It wasn't showing like, smog or graffiti or, traffic or something. Very pretty urban city skyline. The other picture they showed them was of a very pretty rural nature scene. Also a range of colors, water, sky, clouds. So they're both visually appealing pictures. And yet what they found was your brain responded in really different ways. People who were looking at the urban scene showed lots of brain activation. Their brain was active, was firing, was processing. People looking at the rural nature scene showed relaxed, calm brain waves, like they were meditating or sleeping. And so this study really suggests that just looking at nature through a window is probably very physiologically relaxing for the body, and that helps speed up recovery from major surgery. I started today's talk by describing the role of personality, and I said some people are happier than other people, and the reality is that's true. There are people who absolutely have a head start on happiness. And that's one of the reasons why things like better cell phone, better climate, more money, whatever, doesn't make us feel happy consistently. As Martha Washington said, I am still determined to be cheerful and happy in whatever situation I may be. For I've also learned from experience that the greater part of our happiness or misery depends upon our dispositions and not upon our circumstances. So what is it about personality that really predicts happiness? And there are three distinct variables that are very consistently found in the literature. One of these is extroversion. People who are extroverted like doing new things, like meeting new people. They probably have an easier time forming and finding a social network. So one is extroversion. Two is self-esteem. People feel good about themselves. This is a cartoon, I'll read the caption aloud, that illustrates the opposite. So it's somebody writing, "Dear diary, sorry to bother you again." But the way that self-esteem seems to really help us is it allows people to find some silver lining no matter what. Now, I'm going to tell you about a little bit of a complicated study. So you need to pay attention, or else some people will laugh and you'll be like, what happened? So they brought in dating couples, people who are dating each other. And they said, we're going to give you and your partner the exact same questionnaire. And then we're going to compare your answers to see how people in a relationship think about the relationship. So you'll fill out the exact same questionnaire as your partner. So you come in, you're seated across from your partner at a little table. So the first person turns to the first page of their questionnaire and it says, where'd you meet? How long have you been dating? And their partner sits over here and it says, where'd you meet? How long have you been dating? That's not the complicated part. Then this person turns to the second page of their questionnaire and it says, please list everything you hate about your dating partner. So you start writing, kind of messy, kind of stubborn, kind of stingy, whatever. This person turns to the second page of their questionnaire and it says, please list absolutely every single item in your dorm room. So you start writing, I got my books, I got my futon, I got my blankets, I got my computer, I've got my shoes, I got my posters. You're writing and writing and writing. This person's looking at you. They're going like, why are they using the back? What happened? Everybody turns to the third page, and the third page says, how do you feel about your relationship and your partner? Now, here's what's remarkable. If you have high self-esteem and you have sat there and watched what you believe is your partner getting a hand cramp, frantically writing 500 things very easily that they hate about you, you say, oh, I love them so much. I mean, after all, they hate 500 things about me. And we're still dating. So they must love me at some deep core level. This is like my soulmate. This is like fate. This is a wonderful turn of events. And that's really the power. People with high self-esteem take what should be a relationship damning experience, and you find that silver lining. One more personality trait that operates in much the same way, optimism. People who are optimistic, very good at finding that silver lining. Freud told a story about a couple who came to see him in therapy. And at one point during the course of the therapy session, the husband turned to the wife and said, if one of us were to die, I think I would go live in Paris. So as one of us, I have this Paris plan. My oldest son has a remarkable ability to show this kind of optimism. Andrew was in public school from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 9th grade, he moved to an elite prep school that he was woefully underprepared for in every possible way. And he struggled in every possible academic discipline. But he struggled especially in Spanish. And midway through his first trimester, Andrew had a 50 in Spanish. This is a school that uses the traditional 1 to 100 grading scale, so 50 was really not good. So at the end of November, Andrew calls me and says, Mom, I got my grades. Good news about Spanish. And I said, oh, thank goodness, because I was so worried, what with the 50? And he goes, yes, it's good news. I said, great, what'd you get? He goes, I got a 58. And I said, that is not good news. And he goes, no, it's 8 points higher than I had in October. And I said, you got an F, you got an F in Spanish. And he said, Mom, it's really an F+. And I said, I'm a professor, that's not a choice. There is never a plus on the F, that's not even an option, And he says, no, but at the rate I'm going, I'm gonna have a 66 in January. And I was like, that's a D, that's also really bad. But here really is what is good about Andrew and, Andrew's life is that by all accounts, someday he's gonna end up in prison. And hopefully not a Spanish-speaking prison, anyway. But he's gonna be fine, because he's gonna call home and be like, Mom, I got this bunk bed, I got this roommate, there's this exercise yard, they bring in the meals through the door 3 times a day, it's so relaxing. Because anyone who can call home with the good news about their F+, he's gonna be fine, right? I mean, yeah, he's set. He's gonna be, poor and living in my basement, but he's gonna be happy. And this ability to find happiness, no matter what, is tremendously helpful. I'm going to share with you now one of my favorite quotes that really illustrates this perfectly, and it's by Nelson Mandela. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. So this ability to find that silver lining no matter what is tremendously predictive. And the good news for all of us is that we know that we get a little bit better at finding that silver lining after we've experienced some adversity, that we actually can gain some skills and strategies in doing that. And that helps explain a really interesting finding that is replicated across cultures, and that is the link between age and happiness. So I'm going to show you now some data on the link between age and happiness, and this is data collected from the United States from people ages 18 to 85, but the shape of the curve is identical in every single country that has been studied. So it's not a uniquely American finding. So here's the data, and for people watching at home, it's a U-shaped curve. And what you see is that people who are 18 to 21, so the far left-hand side, they're very happy. And really, what in the world is there not to be happy about when you're 18 to 21? Then, in what is bad news for some people, including me, happiness drops like a stone, right up until around age 50. This, of course, corresponds with what we think about in our society as a midlife crisis. It's also an age at which many people have teenagers living in their home. But then, in what is good news for every single person here, happiness increases in your 60s, in your 70s, and they've studied people up to age 85. And around 70, you hit the same happiness you had 18 to 21, and then you get happier still. And so that's really a remarkable finding. To try to examine what explains this increase in happiness in your 70s and 80s, researchers have done qualitative interviews. And they've asked people, how do you spend your time? And here's what they find, and it's very consistent. Younger people are really worried about having a big social network, what I like to call Facebook friends. Lots and lots of people, but you're not particularly close or connected to many of them. People in their 70s and 80s get rid of the riffraff. They focus on a smaller number of relationships, but they're the relationships with people they care about and who care about them. So people are basically saying, I'm choosing quality over quantity. And that finding is actually perfectly illustrated in this following Peanuts cartoon I found. And so their cartoon says, as we grow up, we realize it is less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones. So here's the practical question. Do you have to live to be 70 or 80 to be that smart? So to test that, researchers at Stanford did another set of studies with a really unique sample. These were men in their 40s and 50s living in San Francisco in the early 1990s, and these men were HIV positive. So in the early 1990s, AIDS was a death sentence. We had no treatment, and these were men in their 40s and 50s who were never going to reach their 70s or 80s. And they asked these men, how do you spend your time? And they did exactly what people in their 70s and 80s do. They got rid of the riffraff. They had small social networks of people who they cared about and who cared about them. So what's important practically about that finding is that what it tells us is that when we believe time is limited because we're in our 80s or because we have a terminal illness that's giving us a dramatically shortened life expectancy, people automatically make the choice to prioritize quality relationships over quantity. But we could all make that choice no matter our age, no matter our health circumstance. And that brings me to the most important thing I'm going to say today, and that is the single best predictor of our happiness is the quality of our relationships. Now, I've talked before about relationships, marriage, if you're a man, children for no one. But the good news is they don't have to be relationships with a certain label. They can be relationships with friends, with dating partners you're not married to, with family members. It doesn't matter the label on the relationship. What matters is the quality of that relationship. But here's what we all have to be worried about. Who here has ever been somewhere, a park, an airport, a restaurant, whatever, and seen two people together, both of them on their cell phones? Who's ever seen that? Like all the time, right? The presence of cell phones decreases our ability to have precisely the kind of intimate conversations that help us build high-quality relationships. I'm going to tell you now about a really simple study. Researchers brought in people who wanted to have a get-to-know-you conversation with a stranger. They paired them up, put them in private rooms, and just said, have a 15, 20-minute conversation. The researchers audio taped the conversations and then went back and listened to them later on to code for how meaningful, how vulnerable, how intimate, basically was it a high quality conversation. So half the people just get paired up and have the conversation. The other half of people, before the conversation starts, the researcher takes their cell phone and they put it on the table right in between the two people. So it's the researcher's phone, it's not either of the people's phone, and the phone is turned off. So it's not going to ring, it's not going to vibrate. It's just a phone sitting on a table. And yet what they found was the presence of that turned off phone on the table led to a lower quality of conversation, less intimate, less meaningful, less vulnerable. So imagine the hit that many people take in their daily lives when their phones often aren't turned off and do belong to us. And that means that putting away our phones is one of the best ways to really have intimate, vulnerable, meaningful conversations that let us build high-quality relationships, the best predictor of our happiness. So I've talked today about why we care about happiness. I've talked about what doesn't make us happy, and I've talked about what does make us happy. I want to conclude by giving you some overall findings from the field of positive psychology. So first, we know that genetics matters. I started the talk by describing the power of genetics. And the reality is, our genes determine about half of our happiness. And that's probably driven by things like extroversion, self-esteem, optimism. And that means that some people have a head start on finding happiness. This is a cartoon of a castle, and the person says, "I could cry when I think of all the years I wasted accumulating money, only to learn that my cheerful disposition is genetic." So yeah, the reality is half of our happiness is determined by our genes. But here's what's important. That also means half of it isn't. And that's the half I care about. Because half we totally compare and we can do something about. I have talked today from the very beginning about the power of adaptation. And what I've said is, yeah, it's really too bad because good things happen and you just adapt. You get more money, you have better climate, you win the lottery, you have a better cell phone, whatever. You just adapt, and we don't get this lasting benefit from good events. But here's what's really important to remember. This power of adaptation is actually really good because it also allows us to adapt to bad events. I'm going to tell you now about a really difficult story. And given where this talk is, the story will probably be familiar to many people here. But it's a story of a family living in a small town in Connecticut a few years ago, the family of Dr. William Pettit. So as some of you may remember, one night, two men broke into this family's home. They tied up the dad in the basement. They tied the mom and the two girls to their beds. And they proceeded to sexually assault all three of them. The girls were ages 11 and 17. Then, to hide evidence of their crimes, the men set the house on fire. The dad was able to escape from the basement. He had a head injury, but he lived. But the mom and both daughters died of smoke inhalation. So most of us hear that story and think, how could he ever find happiness again? He's lost his wife, he's lost both of his kids, and he hasn't just lost them. He's lost them in about the most difficult set of circumstances that we can wrap our minds around. And for most of us, thinking about him ever finding happiness seems impossible to imagine. And yet here's a picture from him. A couple of years ago, he met a woman who volunteered as a photographer for the foundation he established to honor his family's memory. They became friends. Over time, they fell in love, and they were married. His first wife's family attended their wedding and said, "We're so happy that you have somebody to share your life with again." And a couple of Decembers ago, they had a little boy. So that does not mean that he's the same happy. And it doesn't mean that that tragedy doesn't change and shape and influence him in fundamental ways and always will. But what that story speaks to is the power of the human spirit. That even in the midst of terrible loss and terrible tragedy, we all have the ability to find happiness again, even in dire and difficult circumstances. And ultimately, the most important lesson we all need to remember is that no matter where we fall in that natural genetic lottery, for many people, happiness also involves effort. We have to decide that we want to be happy. We have to decide that we deserve to be happy. And we have to be willing to structure our lives in ways that bring us that happiness. As Elizabeth Gilbert says, happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you have achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it. So I enjoy giving this talk. I hope that you have enjoyed the time that we have spent. But in all honesty, my real goal is for you to use what I've said moving forward. And so as promised, I always end with 10 strategies. And I do 10 because I'm really hoping that everyone in this room will find 2 or 3 that speak to them, that resonate with them in some way, and that you will do this moving forward. And again, none of them are sell all your belongings and move to Aruba. So, 1, change your behavior. There are lots of simple things we can do that increase happiness. Who here gets enough sleep? Raise your hand. So like a lot of you could start with that one. Who makes a point of exercising regularly? Hey, and just for the record, sleeping, it's actually easier than exercising. Yeah. Who makes a point of spending time outside? Given where you live, you all should be doing this one. Good, good, good. You're really in a beautiful area. Does anyone meditate? Oh, great. I see a bunch of hands. That's wonderful. Lots of research in psychology and neuroscience is illustrating the power of meditation for both psychological and physical well-being. So if you don't do that one already, this is a pretty simple one that's a great place to start. 2, find your match, personally and professionally. This just means find what you love. And this could be in your career, it could be in your volunteer work, it could be in your family, in your community. But what really matters is that you find what you love. As Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. But it's also really important to find this match at a personal level, not just in your professional, academic, community volunteer life. There's a scale in psychology that's called the sensation-seeking scale. And what this scale basically measures is how much you like the feeling of like high level of arousal. Some people really like that, heart beating fast, etc. Some people really don't. This is not a scale like IQ where high is good. You just have to figure out which person you are, because different situations make different people happy. So I'm going to give you a quick quiz. I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you have to raise your hand for whichever choice best describes you. Question 1. Some people would like to parachute out of an airplane. Some people would like to never parachute out of an airplane. All right, raise your hand if you're one of the parachute jumpers. All right, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you're one of the smart people. Yeah. All right, so that's 1. 2, some people when they get into a pool go toe, knee, ankle, thigh. Some people when they go into a pool dive cannonball right in. Who are the toe, knee, ankle, thigh people? And who are the dive cannonball people? Okay, 3, I'm just doing 3. Some people when they go on vacation like the excitement and adventure of camping outdoors. Some people when they go on vacation like the warmth and comfort of a luxury hotel. All right, who are the campers? Raise your hands. And who are the luxury hotel people? Yeah. I say to my husband, your camping wife is your second wife. Anyway, so again, it doesn't matter which one you are. What matters is that you figure out which one you are because different situations make different people happy. 3, read a book you love. And this is wonderful to see an independent bookstore here, by the way. Who remembers reading a book that you didn't want to end? Right? It's a great feeling. And it doesn't matter what the book is. This is my husband's favorite book, The Road. It's a little dark, But he loves the father-son story. He loves the writing. It just speaks to him. So it doesn't matter what the book is. Get a book, pour yourself into it. It's a wonderful way of increasing happiness. 4, keep a gratitude journal. Who here goes to sleep at night thinking about their to-do list and the problems they're facing? So this is like a different idea. This idea is to only go to sleep at night after you've written down 2 or 3 things that you are grateful for in your life right now. And that's the key. They can't be like, things I'll be grateful for once I retire, once I move, once whatever. Things that you're grateful for right now. As Dale Carnegie said, one of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our window today. 5, make a gratitude visit. This is one of my favorites. This idea comes from Professor Marty Seligman, who's at the University of Pennsylvania. And what he has people do is to think about a person who changed and shaped the nature and direction of their lives in some fundamental way. Could be a teacher, boss, mentor, et cetera. But somebody who really played a major role in changing and shaping who they became. Raise your hand if you have somebody in your life who played that role. Great, great. So that's just about half of you. That's wonderful. So here's the challenge. In our society, guess when we typically express what those people meant to us? When they die. We do it in a eulogy. So this idea is to not wait for the eulogy. This idea is to write that person a letter and then travel to the person and stand in front of them and read the letter aloud. And that is a tremendously powerful experience for the person who's reading the letter and, of course, for the person who's hearing the letter. So when I think about the person who played this role in my life, it was my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Doherty had been in World War II, and he'd been a Marine in World War II, and he had lost his right arm picking up a grenade. So he had a stump on his right arm, and he had this giant metal hook that strapped around his body with a claw, and he would write with chalk on the blackboard, clutched in this claw. I went to public school. He also smoked throughout the entire day, also with this claw. And sometimes he would blow it out the window, but sometimes not. So anyway, so he was very scary. He had this hook and this stump and this smoke, and he was big and terrifying. But every single paper I did for Mr. Doherty, he covered in red. Unpack, organize, expand, detail, etc. And Mr. Doherty taught me how to write. And I am here talking to you today because I know how to write. As my lovely introduction today said, I have an undergraduate degree from Stanford. I have a doctoral degree from Princeton. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because of Mr. Doherty in 7th and 8th grade. That's why I have the career that I have. And when I learned that Mr. Doherty had died, I wrote his widow a letter and told her that. So if you have someone in your life who played this role, don't wait for the eulogy. This one becomes the eulogy very, very fast. 6, smile, even when you aren't happy. This is the fake it till you make it idea. We often think that smiling reflects how we feel, but smiling can also change how we feel. As this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh says, sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. Very clever study, brought in people, had them hold chopsticks in their teeth in one of 3 facial expressions: a neutral expression, a slight smile, or a big beaming smile. Then, while you held chopsticks in your teeth, you put your hand in a bucket of freezing cold ice water. And they said, keep it there as long as you can, and when you can't stand it anymore, pull your hand out. People holding the big beaming smile kept their hand in the bucket of water significantly longer. So smiling actually changed how their body responded to pain. Now, who remembered the baseball player study that I started the talk with today about how men with the big smile live longer? This is a possible explanation for why people who smile actually changes their physiological reaction. 7, perform random acts of kindness. And this is also one of my favorites because basically like anything counts. People who volunteer in their communities, higher levels of happiness. People who donate to charity, higher levels of happiness. I'm going to show you next a map of the world. Every single country that's colored green, positive correlation between happiness and charitable giving. So as you can see, it's virtually the whole world. It's almost every single country they've studied. Researchers have brought in people, put them in an MRI machine, and told them to imagine giving a gift to a friend. When you imagine giving a gift to a friend, a part of the brain is activated that it processes rewarding experiences. The exact same part of the brain that's activated when you eat chocolate. Also when you use cocaine, but that's like a less good example. 8, spend money on the right things. I started today by saying, yeah, there's no link between money and happiness. But the reality is we can spend money in better or worse ways. What's a good way to spend it? Experiences. This could be travel, tickets to the big game, a concert, a Broadway show, whatever, an experience. What's not a good way to spend it? Belongings. Expensive, watch, car, purse, whatever. Initially it's exciting, and then it's just your watch. Doesn't bring you lasting happiness. Experiences let us anticipate them, let us experience, and let us look back on them. We don't acclimate in the same way. And as nobody says on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. No one is thinking that. And as philosopher Roger Corliss says, trying to be happy by accumulating possessions is like trying to satisfy hunger by taping sandwiches all over your body. Doesn't work. 9, avoid comparisons. Many people feel perfectly happy right up until they start comparing their own lives to other people's lives, and then that makes them feel worse. This cartoon says, I do count my blessings, but then I end up counting those of others who have more and better blessings, and that pisses me off. Quote by Teddy Roosevelt, comparison is the thief of joy. And this one is really tricky in today's day and age in which many people spend a lot of time on something that I like to call fake book, in which people write about only the what? Good stuff. It's the equivalent of like, the family holiday letter. My kid's valedictorian. I just ran the Boston Marathon in under 3 hours, again. Our whole family went to Tahiti for 2 weeks and loved each other the whole time. So when I'm on Facebook, I try to write things like, all of my kids have lice. Which I'm telling you more often than not has totally been my life. But here's the reality. We all have choice about the comparisons we make. When my son Andrew was about to be tossed from his prep school for his F+, I had a cousin who had a son a little bit younger than Andrew who had leukemia. And Sarah was spending her time with Parker in the hospital. And what I would say again and again is, Sarah, my cousin, wishes her son were failing Spanish in high school. I'm lucky. And that's the reality, that we all have the choice about the comparisons we make. That we can make comparisons that make us feel better. We can make comparisons that make us feel worse. That's actually up to us. 10th, and I do this one last, build and maintain close relationships, and I do it last because it is the most important predictor of our happiness. But here's the reality. Close relationships are hard. They take time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise and vulnerability. We don't get good relationships by magic. I use this picture of a dancer on point to illustrate this dichotomy. If you look at a dancer on point from a distance, it looks easy, it looks effortless, it looks magical, it looks beautiful. But the reality of dancing on point is that your feet are bruised and calloused and they hurt and they're bloody and it's hard. And then it's only to look at it from a distance that looks effortless and beautiful. And my final quote for you today speaks to this, and it's by Tolstoy. But on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at it that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. And that's really the reality. Close relationships are the best predictor of our happiness, but you don't get close relationships without conflict, compromise, time, energy, effort. And my final picture for you today is of my lovely dog. And I use this picture for a reason. Pets bring us what kind of love? Unconditional. So my husband and I have been married for 25 years. We have the 3 kids. You saw the picture earlier. We have the lovely dog. We have the following deal. Somebody leaves the other one. The one who leaves takes the 3 kids. And the other one gets this dog. That has kept us, very committed. This is my final story. I gave this talk a couple years ago in Dallas, and a man came up afterwards and he goes, I have the perfect ending for you. And so now I use it. So here's this man's story. Imagine you come home one night from work and put your wife and your dog in the trunk of your car and drive around for an hour. At the end of the hour, when you open up the trunk, guess who's still happy to see you? Then that man told me he was divorced, and I'm like, really? I can't imagine, Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it.